I was paid $100,000 to deliver fresh meat to a classified werewolf colony. I still remember the exact moment. I realized I should have torn up that contract and driven away. It was 3 in the morning. My headlights were cutting through fog so thick it felt like driving through milk, and I was standing in front of a gate that had no business existing where the GPS said there was nothing but national forest land. Nothing but trees and darkness and whatever was waiting on the other side. My name is Elena. I'm 34. I live in a cramped apartment in Spokane with a cat who hates me, and until last October, I made my living driving refrigerated trucks for a small logistics company that specialized in, let's call them unusual deliveries. You know the type. Medical supplies to remote clinics at odd hours. Temperature-sensitive cargo that couldn't wait for morning. Stuff that paid well because no one else wanted the routes. I'd been doing it for 6 years. 6 years of lonely highways, truck stop coffee, and radio static. I'd seen things on those roads. Deer that didn't move right. Figures standing in fields where no houses existed. But I told myself stories to explain them all away. We all do that, don't we? When something doesn't fit, we hammer it until it does. Until it feels safe. The call came on a Tuesday. Pause. I remember because I was doing laundry, and my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was a man. Middle-aged, maybe. Professional, but with an edge of exhaustion. Like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Ms. Elena Vance?" he asked. I told him yes, though I never gave my full name on company lines. That should have been my first warning. They already knew who I was. "We have a delivery. One night only. $100,000. Wired to your account before you leave the depot. No questions asked. No delivery signature required." I laughed. I actually laughed and asked if this was some kind of prank. But he wasn't joking. The money hit my account while I was still on the phone. I watched the notification pop up on my screen, and my hands started shaking. Pause, not from excitement, from fear, because nothing good pays that much. Nothing legal, nothing safe. "What am I delivering?" I asked. "Fresh meat," he said. "Refrigerated, for pallets, to a classified location. You'll be given coordinates 2 hours before departure." I should have said no. Pause, I know that now. I knew it then, deep in my gut, in that animal part of us that recognizes danger before our brains catch up. But I was drowning in medical debt from my mother's final months. I was one missed payment from losing my apartment. And $100,000 felt like a rope thrown to someone already underwater. I said yes. The depot was an unmarked warehouse at the edge of the industrial district. No signage, no other trucks, just a single loading bay with a man in a black parka who checked my ID, handed me a sealed envelope, and loaded the pallets himself without saying a word. The meat was wrapped in industrial plastic, frozen solid, labeled only with codes I didn't recognize. Beef, I assumed. Pork. Nothing that explained the smell that seeped through the refrigeration unit as I pulled away. It didn't smell like meat. It smelled like copper, like a penny held too long in a sweaty palm, like the air before a lightning storm, but thicker, heavier. Wrong. The coordinates led me northeast into the Colville National Forest. Deep into it, past the campgrounds, past the ranger stations, past the point where paved roads turned to gravel and gravel turned to dirt and dirt turned to something that was barely a trail. My truck bounced and groaned, branches scraping against the sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. The GPS lost signal 40 minutes in. I was navigating by the printed directions in that sealed envelope, which I wasn't supposed to open until I reached the final checkpoint. Checkpoint. Nervous laugh. That's what they called it. A metal gate in the middle of nowhere, flanked by cameras that moved on their own, tracking my approach. There was no guard, just a keypad where I entered the code from the envelope, and the gate swung open with a mechanical groan that sounded almost reluctant. Like even the machinery knew I shouldn't be there. The road beyond was different, paved somehow despite being 50 miles from any infrastructure that could have maintained it. Smooth and black, winding through trees that grew too tall and too close together, their branches interlocking overhead until my headlights illuminated only a tunnel of wood and shadow. Voice trembling, I couldn't see the sky. I couldn't see the stars. It felt like driving into the throat of something massive and waiting. I drove for another hour. Maybe longer. Time started feeling strange, elastic. I'd glance at the clock and realize 20 minutes had passed, or only 2. The radio was pure static, even the emergency bands. My phone showed no signal, but the screen kept lighting up with notifications I couldn't read, symbols that weren't any language I recognized. I told myself it was a glitch. I told myself a lot of things that night. Then I saw the lights. They appeared suddenly, around a bend in the road. Not electric lights, not fluorescent or incandescent. These were warmer, flickering, firelight spilling from windows set low in structures I couldn't fully make out through the trees. Buildings, yes, but wrong somehow. Too low to the ground, too angular, like someone had described architecture to a creature that had never seen human dwellings and asked it to build what it imagined. I slowed to a crawl. My breath was fogging the windshield despite the heater running full blast. I wiped it clear with my sleeve, and that's when I saw the first one. It was standing beside the road, just standing there, watching my truck approach. At first, I thought it was a bear. We get bears out here, black bears mostly, sometimes grizzlies if you go deep enough. But this was wrong. The proportions were wrong. It stood on 2 legs, mostly, though its posture was hunched, ape-like. Its shoulders were too broad, its arms too long, ending in hands that I could see even from 30 yards away. Hands with fingers that were too long, too jointed, ending in points that caught my headlights like black glass. Its eyes reflected back at me, not the green or gold of a nocturnal animal. Red, deep, arterial red, glowing with their own sick light. It didn't blink. It didn't move. It just watched me pass, and I felt its gaze like pressure against my skin, like hands pressing against my ribs from the inside. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I didn't stop. I didn't dare. The directions said to proceed to the central loading dock, and I followed them because I didn't know what else to do. Because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. Because the money was already in my account, and some part of me still believed that if I just completed the delivery, I could leave and pretend this never happened. The central area opened up suddenly, a clearing in the forest that shouldn't have existed. The buildings were arranged in a circle, low and angular, smoke rising from chimneys that were too thin, too tall. And between them were more of them. Dozens, maybe 100, moving through the clearing between the buildings in patterns that almost looked like routine. Some were more human-shaped than others. Some walked upright, wearing clothes that might have been salvaged from dumpsters or stolen from drying lines. Flannel shirts torn at the seams, jeans split to accommodate legs that bent wrong. Others moved on all fours, loping between structures with a fluid, terrifying grace. Their bodies covered in hair that wasn't quite fur, more like bristles, like a boar's, like something that had evolved wrong. None of them looked at me directly as I pulled up to the loading dock. Pause, but I felt them all go still. I felt the quality of the air change, the way a room feels when someone enters behind you and you haven't heard the door. The silence was absolute. No insects, no birds, just the idling of my engine and the pounding of my own heart, so loud I was sure they could hear it. A figure approached the driver's side door, human-shaped or close enough, tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing a coat that had once been expensive, now stained with things I didn't want to identify. Its face. Its face was the worst part, because it was almost human. The eyes were too far apart, the jaw too broad, the teeth visible even with its mouth closed, yellow and crowded and wrong. But it held itself like a man. It moved with intention, with intelligence. "You're late," it said. Pause. Its voice was gravel and rust, like vocal cords that weren't meant for speech being forced to perform. "The moon rises in 40 minutes. We need the cargo unloaded before then." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, fumbling for the door handle, but it stopped me with a hand that pressed against the window. The fingers were splayed, the nails thick and yellow and curved. I could see the pads of its fingertips, black and textured, pressing against the glass. "Stay in the cab," it said. "Do not look directly at the unloading. Do not exit your vehicle. When the cargo is gone, drive away. Do not stop until you reach the gate. Do not look back." Stepped away, and others approached. Pause, not the ones in clothes, the others. The ones that moved on all fours, that made sounds deep in their chests that weren't quite growls, weren't quite words. I watched in my mirrors as they swarmed the back of my truck, tearing at the sealed pallets with claws and teeth, shredding the industrial plastic like tissue paper. And then I heard the sounds the meat made as it fell. Quietly wet sounds, heavy sounds, the sounds of things hitting the ground that shouldn't have been frozen solid. Because I saw shapes in the torn wrapping. I saw limbs that weren't animal. I saw hair that was blonde and brown and black, matted with blood that was still somehow, impossibly warm enough to steam in the cold night air. I slammed my eyes shut. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and I prayed. Though I haven't prayed since I was a child. I prayed to anything that might be listening, anything that might get me out of this place alive. The sounds around my truck were terrible, tearing, chewing, wet grunts of satisfaction that were almost human. The truck rocked on its suspension as something heavy climbed onto the roof. I felt the weight of it, the way the metal groaned, and I didn't look up. I didn't look up. Then the moon rose. I felt it before I saw it. A pressure against my closed eyelids, a warmth that made no sense in the freezing night. The sounds around me changed. The chewing stopped. The grunts turned to howls. Not the lonely call of a wolf, but something organized, something choral. Dozens of voices raised together in a sound that wasn't celebration or mourning, but something else. Something ancient and hungry and triumphant. The weight on my roof screamed, not in pain, in ecstasy. And then I heard the transformation happening, the sounds of bones cracking and reforming, of flesh tearing and healing, of something becoming more than it was and less than it had been. The truck shook violently, and I felt hot liquid dripping through the seams of the roof, running down the windows, smelling of copper and musk and something sweet, too sweet, like fruit rotting in summer heat. "Drive," a voice said, right beside my ear, though no one was in the cab with me. "Drive now, human, while we remember our agreement, while we remember what you brought us. Drive and never return." I didn't need to be told twice. I floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward, and I felt whatever was on the roof thrown clear. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't look at the shapes in the clearing, now moving with renewed energy, now running alongside my truck, keeping pace easily despite my speed, their red eyes flashing in my peripheral vision. I just drove, the wheel shaking in my hands, my breath coming in gasps that were almost sobs. The gate was open when I reached it, voice trembling. I shot through without slowing, and I kept driving, the paved road turning to dirt, dirt to gravel, gravel to pavement, until I saw the first streetlight of civilization and I finally let myself breathe. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 30 miles later. I sat in the parking lot, shaking, for 2 hours before I could call anyone, before I could form words. The money was still in my account, cleared. It was real. I could have used it to start over, to disappear, to become someone else somewhere else, but I couldn't spend it. Every time I looked at my balance, I saw those red eyes. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that choral howling. I donated most of it anonymously to animal shelters and trauma centers. I kept $10,000, enough to pay off my mother's debts, enough to keep my apartment for another year. The rest felt like blood money, like something that would mark me if I used it. I quit driving trucks. I work from home now, doing data entry for a company that doesn't know what I look like. I don't go out after dark. I keep my windows locked and my curtains drawn, especially on full moons, because sometimes, late at night, I hear howling in the distance. And sometimes, voice trembling. Sometimes I hear footsteps on my roof, and the groan of metal under weight that shouldn't be there, and a voice like gravel and rust whispering, We remember what you brought us. We remember you. I don't know what they are. I don't know if they're werewolves in the storybook sense or something older, something that never needed a full moon to be monstrous. I don't know if they're a government experiment gone wrong, or a species that evolved parallel to us, hiding in the forests we haven't logged yet. I don't know if they're planning something, if my delivery was part of a larger preparation, if the meat I brought them was what they needed to grow stronger, to multiply. I only know that I was paid $100,000 to be a delivery driver for monsters. And I know that some debts can't be paid in money. Some debts are paid in fear, in sleepless nights, in the certainty that somewhere, in the deep woods where the maps end and the roads don't go, there are things that walk like men and hunt like wolves, and they remember my name. They remember my face. And someday, when they need another delivery, or when they just need someone who knows too much to disappear, they'll come for me. So if you're watching this, if you found this video somehow, pause. If you're one of the people who searches for these stories late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows seem to move, take my advice. If someone offers you too much money for a simple job, if the location is classified and the cargo is unexplained, if your gut tells you to run, run. Run and don't look back. Because the things in the woods, they don't need you to believe in them. They don't need your permission to exist. I didn't burn them. I wish I had. What you're about to hear isn't my story. It belongs to a woman named Cecilia Marsh, born 1871 in Harlan County, Kentucky. She was a schoolteacher, a Methodist, a practical woman who believed in hard work and scripture and not much else. She kept a journal from 1894 until 1901. Welcome to Dark North Stories family. We got the place where your worst nightmares are someone else's reality. I'm your host, and I've spent years digging through police files, confidential confessions, and witness testimonies to bring you the stories that'll make your skin and blood run cold. So turn off the lights, check your locks one more time, and prepare yourself for stories that will have all alone, yes my dear you, haunt you long after the video ends. Stay safe, stay connected, and if you are riding, turn on the roof light. Its first narration, thumbs up. They say working night shifts in the Pacific Northwest forests changes you. Some rangers come back different, quieter, like they've seen something they can never unsee. I don't talk about my great-grandmother's journals. Not to family, not to anyone. My mother kept them locked in a cedar chest under her bed for 30 years, and when she passed, she left me a note that just said, "Burn them." Stopped. Pause. What I'm going to read to you tonight comes from her October entries of 1898. I've transcribed them as faithfully as I can, filling in the gaps between her words with what she described in enough detail that you'll understand. I've read these pages maybe 40 times now. Nervous laugh each time. I hope it ends differently. It never does. Cecilia wrote that October of 1898 was the coldest anyone in Harlan County could remember. The leaves turned early, and by the second week the mountains were already bone bare, standing like gray skeletons against a white sky. She was 27 years old and unmarried, living with her brother Thomas and his wife Ruth in a 2-room cabin about 4 miles from the nearest town. Thomas was a timber surveyor. His job that fall was to assess a section of old-growth forest up in the ridgeline above Clover Fork Creek, forest that the lumber company in Lexington had purchased but never logged. They wanted to know why. Thomas asked Cecilia to come along as a record keeper. She was good with numbers, good with words. Ruth was pregnant and couldn't travel. So on the morning of October the 14th, Thomas and Cecilia loaded a mule with surveying equipment and a week's worth of provisions, and they rode up into the mountains. The first 2 days were unremarkable. Cecilia wrote about the beauty of the high forest, the way the fog sat in the hollows like something breathing. She wrote about the silence, and she specifically noted the silence, described it as heavy the way a wool blanket is heavy. No birdsong, no squirrels, just the sound of their own footsteps on the frozen ground and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere distant in the trees. She told herself it was the cold keeping the animals quiet. Thomas said the same. Pause. They both kept saying that. On the 3rd day, Thomas found the first marker. It was a sapling, maybe 2 inches around, that had been bent completely horizontal, then tied to another bent sapling about 8 feet away, forming a kind of arch low to the ground. The bark on both trees had been stripped from about knee-height upward, and the exposed wood had been scored deeply, in long vertical lines like something had dragged its fingers, or something like fingers, down the length of the trunk with tremendous force. Cecilia measured the grooves with her thumbnail. She estimated they were half an inch deep, into solid wood. Quietly, whatever made them wasn't small. Thomas told her it was probably a black bear scratching. Cecilia, being practical, wrote in her journal that she agreed with him. Then she wrote, "I do not agree with him." They kept going. The surveying work took them deeper into the old growth, into the part of the forest where the trees were genuinely ancient, chestnuts and hemlocks with trunks 6, 7 feet across, their canopies so thick that even leafless they blocked the sky. Down in that part of the ridge, it was darker than it should have been at midday. Cecilia wrote about the cold there, said it was a different kind of cold, not the sharp, clean cold of a mountain morning, but something heavier, something that got inside your coat. Pause, she said it felt deliberate. That evening, camped near a dry creek bed, Cecilia heard it for the first time. She described it carefully because she was a careful woman. She said it sounded like someone calling out from a great distance, the way a voice sounds when it crosses a wide valley. But there was no valley nearby, only dense forest in every direction. The sound had a rhythm to it, not quite language, not quite an animal call, somewhere in between, like the memory of a word spoken in a language you've never heard. It came from the north, then, after a long silence, from the east, then, from directly above their camp, somewhere up in the canopy of an old hemlock that stood at the edge of the firelight. Thomas got his rifle. They sat back to back with the fire built high until the sound faded, sometime around 2 in the morning. Cecilia wrote, "Thomas will not say what he thinks it was. I will not say what I think it was. We have agreed not to say." The next morning they found their mule dead. She didn't go into detail about how, and I won't either, except to say that Cecilia used the word arranged, and that single word in her careful schoolteacher handwriting is the thing that woke me up at 3 in the morning more than once. Animals don't arrange things. That's what she meant. That's what she didn't say out loud. They decided to leave, packed what they could carry on their backs, abandoned the surveying equipment, and started down the ridge toward the trail that would take them home. It was maybe 6 miles. Thomas calculated they could make it before dark if they moved quickly. They moved quickly. It didn't matter. About 2 miles down the ridge, Cecilia noticed the tracks. They were in a patch of soft ground near a seep spring, a muddy area maybe 10 feet across where the water came up through the clay. The tracks crossed through the mud from the tree line on one side to the tree line on the other. She described them as roughly human in shape, bipedal with 5 toes but too long. She estimated the print to be about 16 inches from heel to toe. And the stride was wrong. She paced it out. The distance between each print was over 5 feet. She wrote, "Whatever made these tracks was moving very quickly, or its legs are much longer than ours." Then she wrote, "The tracks are going in the same direction we are going. They are fresh. The mud at the edges has not yet settled. They were being followed." Thomas put her in front and walked behind for the last 4 miles. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. Every 20 minutes or so they would stop and listen, and every time they stopped, Cecilia wrote that she could hear something moving parallel to them through the trees. Not directly behind them, alongside them, like it was matching their pace, keeping level with them, curious. She could hear the sound of it. Not footsteps exactly, but a kind of heavy rhythmic displacement of leaf litter, the way large things move when they're not bothering to be quiet. And occasionally that sound again, that calling sound. Closer now, much closer. Close enough that she could hear it wasn't coming from a throat shaped anything like a human throat. They came out of the tree line just after dark and walked the last half mile to the cabin by lantern light. Ruth met them at the door. Cecilia wrote that she hugged her sister-in-law for a long time without saying anything. That night she sat up writing in her journal by candlelight while Thomas told Ruth it was nothing. Just a strange few days, nothing to worry about. He never surveyed that section of forest. No one ever did. The lumber company eventually sold the land. The records show it changed hands 4 times between 1899 and 1910. Each time, the buyer let it sit. Now here is the part one almost didn't include. The part that kept me from sleeping. For 3 weeks after they came down from the ridge, Cecilia wrote about sounds outside the cabin at night. Not every night, maybe 4 or 5 times. A sound she recognized, that calling sound, that rhythmic non-language, drifting up from the tree line south of the property, where the forest came close to the fence. She wrote that Thomas heard it too but refused to acknowledge it. That Ruth started leaving a candle burning all night. That the dog, a big hound they'd had for 6 years, refused to sleep outside anymore and whimpered under the bed until dawn. The last journal entry about the sounds was October 31st, 1898. Cecilia wrote a single line, "It knows where we live." After that, her entries went back to normal for almost 3 years. Recipes, school records, notes about the weather. She never mentioned the forest again. She never explained why the entries stopped in 1901. But I found something tucked into the back cover of the journal, behind the leather. A single folded page, different paper, written in a shakier hand than the rest. No date, just this: Thomas went back. I asked him not to. He said it was just a bear and he needed to prove it to himself. He took the rifle and the dog and he was gone for 3 days. When he came home, he was alone and he would not speak and he would not eat, and every night he sat facing the south window and watched the tree line until morning. He did this for 11 days. On the 12th day, he was gone and we did not find him. The sheriff looked for 2 weeks. I have told Ruth it was an accident. I have told her he fell in the creek. This is not what I believe. I put the journals back in the cedar chest. I locked it. I told myself I was going to do what my mother said and burn them, and I still haven't. I don't know why. Maybe because burning them feels like pretending it didn't happen, and whatever Cecilia Marsh encountered in those Kentucky mountains in 1898, it happened. Her handwriting is too steady, too precise, to her for me to dismiss it. She was not a woman who exaggerated. She was not a woman who frightened easily. But she was frightened. That's the part one can't get past. She was a practical woman who believed in hard work and scripture and not much else. And something in those mountains scared her badly enough that she spent 3 years pretending to herself that it was over. Pause. 3 years of recipes and school records and weather reports. All of it careful and ordinary and completely silent about the thing she'd seen. The thing that had followed them out of the old growth. The thing that had learned where they slept. I live in eastern Tennessee now, about 90 miles from Harlan County, as the crow flies. Quietly, my property backs up to a wood line. And I want to tell you that none of this bothers me. That I read those journals and filed them away as history, as old fear from a harder time. But last week, just after midnight, I heard something from the tree line south of my house. I don't know how to describe it except to say that it had a rhythm to it, like the memory of a word, spoken in a language I've never heard. Whisper tone. It came once from the south. Then, after a long silence, from the east. Then it stopped. I haven't been sleeping well since. I keep the lights on now. And every morning, before I make coffee, I walk to the south window and I look out at the trees. I tell myself I'm just checking the weather. Pause. I'm not checking the weather. Stay inside tonight. Lock your doors. And if you live near old growth, if your property backs up to forest that's been standing longer than anyone can remember, don't go in after dark. Don't call back if you hear something calling. And whatever you do, don't let it learn where you sleep. They're already out there, waiting, watching, hungry. And the moon is always rising somewhere. Sleep well.
DNS, out now. Until next, take care, and God bless us.